Wally Reid, the handsome silent movie star, is often referred to as the screen's most perfect lover. This phrase was also the title of a film created by his wife Dorothy after Wally's tragic death. How did this charming-looking family man, athlete, and movie star become a broken man ruined by drug addiction? Unlike the infamous Latin lover Rudolph Valentino, Wally was considered approachable and respectable, someone suitable for marriage or, in the eyes of the audience of that time, the kind of person you could imagine playing golf with. He was not the type of guy who would evoke fleeting emotions like a whirlwind romance and cause you to despair to the point of suicide over unanswered letters. Born into English nobility, he appeared to be the perfect example of an Anglo-Saxon American Protestant, an educated sportsman who radiated physical and mental health. However, within this polished exterior lay a concealed darkness. This darkness refers to Wally's morphine addiction. He began relying on this drug at a time when society was just starting to understand the concept of addiction and its related consequences. His addiction and death became a symbol of the growing moral decline of the 1920s, centered around issues related to drug use. The film Human Wreckage was a sincere effort by his wife to warn people about the dangers of morphine, or perhaps a carefully planned piece of propaganda in secret collaboration with Will Hayes, who was responsible for upholding moral standards in the film industry. Whatever the true purpose of the film may have been, it marked the beginning of Hollywood's shift toward cleaning up its image, both on and off the screen. Unlike Valentino, Wally Reid is now almost completely forgotten, despite having lived a life many would envy. How did his life unfold through a career in film, car racing, moral struggles, and a battle against opium addiction? Let's delve into the story of Wally Reid, from a promising movie star to the tragedy of a life consumed by addiction. Wallace Reid's rise and fall in Hollywood was one of the most notable of its era. Known as Wall-E, he was the face of silent films for a decade, a globally beloved and successful actor. Wally's ascent to stardom was swift, but his downfall came just as quickly. Today he is largely forgotten, remembered mostly by film historians. Of the more than 200 films he starred in, most are known only to researchers, as many were lost due to the deterioration of their silver nitrate copies. The one widely known fact about Wally is his tragic death in a sanitarium, where he succumbed to morphine addiction. His passing sent shockwaves through Hollywood and marked a turning point for the burgeoning film industry, which was already grappling with scandals. Wally's death served as a wake-up call, prompting studios to take a more active role in managing and protecting their stars. This eventually led to the establishment of the studio system, designed to safeguard the actors who were critical to their success. Despite this, Wally Reid's story has faded into obscurity. He was a true Renaissance man. On screen, he excelled in both drama and comedy, but his talents extended far beyond acting. Wally was also a writer, director, and skilled cameraman. Musically gifted, he played multiple instruments, was an exceptional singer, and was even encouraged by opera legend Geraldine Farrar to pursue a singing career. He was a talented painter, with his works displayed in the homes of Hollywood's elite, and a skilled caricaturist. Athletically, Wally could have been a professional, excelling in football, track, and boxing. He was also a daring car racer, holding a speed record in California, and had a knack for mechanical work, such as rebuilding engines. Above all, he was a devoted husband and father, loved by everyone who knew him. Wallace Reid was a man of remarkable talents, whose story deserves to be remembered. Wallace Reid was born in Lewis Street, Missouri, into a family deeply involved in theater. His mother, Bertha Westbrook, was an actress, while his father, James Hal Reid, was a successful playwright and actor. Hal spent much of his life traveling across the country. At 18, he began his career in Cincinnati as a reporter for the Cincinnati Times-Star, owned by Charles P. Taft, the brother of future President William Howard Taft. Hal had a knack for expanding brief news stories into melodramatic narratives. earning a reputation for his so-called SOP stuff. This talent eventually led him to write plays and perform with local theater groups. Although Hal was described as a whole-souled, big-hearted gentleman, he also had a reputation for being a womanizer. At 22, he had an affair with 16-year-old May Withers, the daughter of a farmer. They eloped, and May gave birth to their daughter Hazel 8 months later. May and Hazel stayed with her family while Hal continued touring with the theater company. At the time, legitimate theater was the main form of entertainment in the U.S. The country's theatrical history stretches back to the Revolutionary War, with the first permanent theaters appearing in the 1700s. Between 1800 and 1850, the theater industry grew rapidly, especially in cities like New York and Philadelphia, where venues could hold anywhere from 250 to 3,500 people. During the 1860s, technological advancements transformed theaters. For example, New York's Booth Theater introduced groundbreaking features for creating scenic effects. However, life on tour was challenging for actors. They had to provide their own costumes, and small companies often traveled by carriage, performing in theaters that lacked basic facilities. Accommodations were minimal, with inexpensive lodging, shared bathrooms, and little comfort. Despite these hardships, the excitement of performing kept actors on the road for the entire season. In December 1889, Hal Reid was enjoying the success of his play Human Hearts, which was well received by audiences. Just before Christmas, he met Bertha Westbrook, and the two married within days. They eloped to Kansas City, where they were wed at the home of the city's only Southern Methodist Episcopal minister. On the morning of April 15, 1892, Bertha gave birth to a son who weighed 11 pounds and 12 ounces. With blonde hair, blue-violet eyes, fair skin, and rosy cheeks, the baby was named William Wallace Reid, after the legendary Scottish hero from Sir Walter Scott's Scottish Chiefs. Bertha lovingly nicknamed him Cotton Top because of his blonde hair, a name she used throughout his life. To everyone else, he was simply known as Wallace. Wallace Reid began performing on stage at a young age, but paused his acting career to focus on his education. He attended Freehold Military School in Freehold Township, New Jersey, and graduated from Perkiomen Seminary in Pennsburg, Pennsylvania, in 1909. During his teenage years, he spent time in Wyoming, where he developed his skills. In the spring of 1910, with little experience, Wallace joined his father Hal's Ranger Troop on a tour of the Midwest. Their tour ended in Chicago around April or May. At this point, Wallace was on the verge of a movie career, though he did not aspire to be an actor. He described his ambitions at that time, saying that he had seen a lot, had been very close to, and had gained plenty of experiences with all sorts of interesting people in unusual places. He mentioned that during breaks from acting, he would write scripts and direct them himself. However, he found breaking into the film industry to be more challenging than he had anticipated. Wallace Reid's life was one of privilege and success in the early 20th century theater and film industry, rising to fame in movies and maintaining a loving marriage for 55 years. His story also serves as a tragic cautionary tale. His downfall, a result of both prohibited substance addiction and the limited medical knowledge of the time, was driven in part by a careless studio system that turned a content, balanced man into an addict in less than 3 years. His experience highlights the risks that plague the entertainment industry, an industry overindulging in its own opulence. Ultimately, Wallace Reid, nicknamed Dashing Wallace Reid, Handsome Wallace Reid, and Wallace Reid, the All-American Boy, fell victim to the very image that made him famous, a fall that nearly derailed the burgeoning film industry. Although initially captivated by the magic of cinema, Wallace's original ambition wasn't to become an actor, but to work behind the camera. One of his earliest employers was Colonel William N. Selig, a key pioneer in the film industry. Born in Chicago in 1864 and frail as a child, Selig worked as a magician in minstrel shows during the 1880s. However, his life changed in 1895 when he encountered a kinetoscope in Dallas. Inspired, he left performing to start a film studio in Chicago. Selig adapted a Lumiere camera and a Latham projector, rebranding them as the Selig Standard Camera and Selig Polyscope Projector, which he sold through the Sears and Roebuck catalog. His company, Selig Polyscope, operated out of a warehouse in Chicago, its products featuring his Diamond S emblem. However, due to his fragile health, Selig relocated to Los Angeles. There, he settled in a new area on the outskirts of the city Hollywood. Selig's first Hollywood studio, located at 145 Alessandro Street, now Glendale Boulevard, produced California's first entirely filmed movie, In the Sultan's Power. The studio gained popularity with its westerns and Oz films. After the success of the 1909 Teddy Roosevelt film Big Game Hunting Africa, Selig began calling himself Colonel and assembled a large collection of African animals to create realistic jungle films. These animals were kept at the Selig Jungle Zoo, which opened in 1911 as a popular attraction featuring scenic walkways, picnic areas, and the largest collection of exotic animals in North America at the time. During the summer of 1911, Wallace Reid became involved with Selig, though details of his role remain unclear due to a lack of surviving records. What is certain is that the Selig studio faced a major upheaval later that year, which may explain Wallace's sudden departure. On October 27, 1911, Francis Boggs, a former Chicago actor and a key figure in silent film who had produced, directed, or written over 200 films, was tragically murdered at the Selig offices. The attacker, Frank Minamatsu, a former employee from Japan, had been fired by Boggs for smoking on duty and intended to kill Selig. Although Selig survived, Boggs, an innocent bystander, lost his life. The incident left the studio in chaos. When Wallace entered the film industry in 1910, the industry was undergoing massive changes. Over 13,000 movie theaters were already operating in the U.S., attracting millions of weekly viewers. New studios and stars were emerging quickly, while the industry was embroiled in constant patent disputes. Thomas Edison held significant power, as his company controlled nearly all film exchanges in the country. However, by 1915, legal challenges began to break Edison's monopoly, and fresh, innovative talent started to reshape the industry. The early history of Hollywood films, especially those involving Wallace Reid, is often incomplete and unclear. Before 1914, studios rarely kept detailed cast records, and actors were not credited in films until around 1919. Unfortunately, much of this information, along with many films from that time, has been lost. Even the archives at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and the Herrick Library, both key resources for film history, contain significant gaps. Their records cover only the years 1911 to 1917 and lack detailed individual film records or complete cast lists. Although it is known that Wallace worked with Selig Films, his name does not appear in their records. Reid entered the film industry during a time of rapid growth and innovation, marked by freedom to experiment and the development of new filmmaking techniques. Wallace worked and learned alongside some of the era's most influential figures, including Griffith, Dwan, and DeMille. The limited details of Wallace's career offer a glimpse into the early days of cinema, a period that saw the evolution of film technology, longer film formats, the rise of the star system, and the expansion of studios. It was also an era shaped by the emergence of figures like Will Hayes, an eager press, movie, obsessed fans, and the industry's first scandals, creating an exciting yet perilous environment. Fame came suddenly, and the new stars had to adapt quickly to an unprecedented level of attention and scrutiny. Never before had such an unprepared group been elevated to such reverence, like a modern pantheon of Greek gods and goddesses, entirely untrained for their new roles. In this chaotic world, prohibited substances became a common way to cope with the intense highs and lows of their newfound stardom. Reid's first Hollywood film, War, Co., starring Charles Kent and Rose Tapley, was released shortly after the Boggs murder on December 8th. His next film, A Red Cross Martyr, featuring Florence Turner, premiered on January 2nd, 1912. By that time, Turner was already a major star at Vitagraph, having appeared in 65 films. Wallace's path to stardom began with a minor role in D.W. Griffith's controversial film The Birth of a Nation, where he portrayed a blacksmith defending himself against attackers. At a time when directors often outshone actors, audiences were captivated by the muscular and handsome young man on screen. Other directors quickly took notice, offering him more significant roles. This marked the start of his rise as a matinee idol, although he still dreamed of working behind the camera. Although he appeared in 120 films, mostly short one-reelers, it was his small role in a major film, playing a shirtless blacksmith working at his forge, that launched him into stardom. Wallace Reid acted in several films with his father and under the direction of film pioneer Alan Dwan. In 1913, while working at Universal Pictures, he met actress Dorothy Davenport and married her. Dorothy, a former child star, had reduced her acting commitments after their marriage. Both Wallace and Dorothy came from prominent theatrical families and spent their childhoods touring. Wallace even worked with Buffalo Bill Cody in his youth, while Dorothy began her film career with D.W. Griffith. At the time of their meeting, Dorothy was a 17-year-old rising star at Universal, and Wallace was a 22-year-old assistant director and actor. They married on October 13, 1913, and later had a son named Billy and adopted a daughter named Betty. After this, Wallace worked with prominent actresses such as Florence Turner, Gloria Swanson, Lillian Gish, Elsie Ferguson, and Geraldine Farrar. These leading roles cemented his reputation as a Hollywood heartthrob. Producer Jesse L. Lasky recognized Wallace's star potential and signed him to a lucrative contract in the mid-1910s. Reid's career featured a variety of roles, including appearances in films like the Joan of Arc drama, Joan the Woman, and the Spanish conquistador epic, The Woman That God Forgot, both of which starred opera singer Geraldine Farrar. By the late 1910s, Wallace shifted to starring in light comedies and dramas. He also discovered a new specialty: automobile-themed thrillers such as The Roaring Road and Excuse My Dust. These films captivated audiences, as cars and racing were becoming increasingly popular. This marked the first major connection between two defining technologies of the early 20th century, cinema and the automobile. A car enthusiast himself, Wallace even attempted to qualify for the 1922 Indianapolis 500. Known for his love of speed, he once said that his best recreation is to get his hands on the wheel of his car. Nothing rests him like that. Determined to compete in the Indianapolis 500, he secured a racing driver's license and prepared to race with his Duesenberg. However, despite his passion and efforts, he never made it to the starting line. It is believed that this was due to the impact of another reason in his life: a growing addiction to prohibited substance. On screen, Wallace frequently appeared in society films, where he was often impeccably dressed in the latest fashions, delighting his female fans. A standout example is The Affairs of Anatole 1921, directed by Cecil B. DeMille. In this film, Wallace delivered an impressive dramatic performance alongside another enigmatic star of the era, Gloria Swanson. Swanson would later achieve legendary status in Billy Wilder's 1950 classic Sunset Boulevard. Remarkably, a complete print of The Affairs of Anatole still survives, making it likely the most significant film of Wallace's career that can be viewed today. Arthur Schnitzler wrote the screenplay, and his work Dream Story would later inspire Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut decades later. This film was based on Schnitzler's 1893 play. In the story, Anatole, played by Wallace, feels dissatisfied in his marriage to Vivian, portrayed by Swanson, and seeks excitement elsewhere. His quest takes him to a nightclub, where he reconnects with his former lover, Emily Dixon. Caught up in the reunion, Anatole resolves to rescue Emily from her superficial city life, which is being funded by a shady theater financier, Gordon Bronson. Although Anatole convinces Emily to reject Bronson's gifts, he ultimately cannot leave his wife for her. Emily, now in love with Anatole, plans a party with Bronson and others. When Anatole finds out, he destroys her apartment in anger and leaves her, likely pushing her toward a future marriage with Bronson. He then begs Vivienne to stop him if he ever expresses a desire to rescue another woman again. Later in the film, Anatole and Vivienne host a party featuring a Hindu hypnotist, Nazar Singh, as the entertainer. During the event, Singh hypnotizes Vivienne, making her believe she is in a flowing stream, prompting her to start undressing. Disillusioned by society's hypocrisy, Anatole decides to leave city life behind and move to the countryside with Vivienne. In the countryside, farmer Avner Elliott discovers that his wife, Annie, bought a dress using stolen church funds. Feeling responsible, he decides to take the blame and sends her away. Overwhelmed by despair, Annie jumps off a bridge but is saved by Anatole and Vivienne, who are boating nearby. Vivienne goes to get a doctor, and while she is away, Annie deceives Anatole and steals his wallet. When Vivienne returns with the doctor, she finds Annie kissing Anatole. Annie departs, lying about how she obtained the money, leaving Anatole disillusioned. He asks the doctor where to find honesty and loyalty, to which the doctor replies that such qualities begin at home. Cecil B. DeMille enjoyed working with actor Wallace Reid, whom he described as a 180-pound diamond. By the early 1920s, Reid had become one of America's most popular stars. He was beloved by women, respected by men, and his films offered a blend of humor, romance, and action. Reid frequently ranked at the top of fan polls and in movie magazines, and he was well regarded by his studio colleagues. One of his endearing traits was his knack for subtly arranging early wrap-ups on set, a quality that made him especially popular with the crew. Wallace's life was transforming in ways that only sudden and immense wealth can provide. In 1919, the developers of Hacienda Park achieved a significant milestone after 14 years of promoting lots in their upscale neighborhood along Sunset Boulevard, now part of West Hollywood. They proudly announced that one of Hollywood's biggest stars had purchased a lot. The star's home was located on DeLongpre Avenue. In fact, the Reid's residence occupied 2 lots at the corner of DeLongpre and Sweetser. The house was a custom designed by architect Frank Moline, one of the prominent architects of the time, alongside Frank Lloyd Wright. The property showcased a Mediterranean revival style. The house resembled an exotic villa with a red tile roof, a swimming pool, and stunning views across the basin. Moline's other notable works included the 190-room Garden Court Apartments in Hollywood, built in 1913 and demolished in 1984, as well as the Ruskin Art Club, constructed in 1923. The Ruskin Art Club, now a private residence on South Plymouth Avenue, is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The strategic placement of homes on the slopes between DeLongpre and Sunset Boulevard made their backyards visible from the streets, turning the intersection of Sweetser Avenue and Sunset Boulevard into a popular stop on tours of movie stars' homes. Postcards featuring rear views of these homes became sought after souvenirs for Hollywood visitors at the time. In 1920, Wallace Reid moved to a new home, unaware that this marked the beginning of his personal struggles. His life began to unravel as he indulged in heavy drinking and wild late-night parties at his Hacienda Park residence. Despite his fame, Wallace remained humble. In 1921, he admitted to Picture Play magazine that he didn't delude himself about being an artist and had never even wanted to be an actor. He referred to when he had played a lumberjack in the Peter B. Kyne story, mentioning that he had a beard, chewed cigars, and acted like a real man in that setting. However, he noted that the outcry from fans had been overwhelming, demanding no more beards or cigar chewing. In interviews, he often shared his dream of becoming a director, once stating, "I hope the name Wallace Reid, director, will mean far more than Wallace Reid, actor." Yet, life had other plans. In the 1920s, the tragic deaths of two major film stars at the age of 31 made headlines across North America. Wallace Reid, the jovial, athletic Anglo-American celebrated as Hollywood's most perfect lover, and Rudolph Valentino, the exotic and mysterious Latin lover. While both deaths were heavily mourned and deemed unforgettable at the time, Valentino's legacy has endured, with his memory still honored. In contrast, Reid has faded into obscurity, becoming one of Hollywood's forgotten icons. Before the public learned of his prohibited substance addiction, Wallace Reid was seen as the cheerful, strong Big Wallace, representing the American ideal both on screen and in real life. However, his addiction began after a freak accident during the filming of Valley of the Giants in 1919. While filming in Oregon, the cast and crew were involved in a train wreck that left Reid with serious injuries, including a deep arm gash and a 4-inch wound on his skull. A doctor was called to treat him and administered prohibited substance to manage his pain, which was a common practice at the time. Unfortunately, this initial dose of the powerful prohibited substance sparked an addiction that would eventually take over his life. As films grew longer and more physically demanding, Wallace's dependency worsened. Over several years, he secretly battled his addiction while producing nearly 24 films. Prohibited substance was extremely costly, reportedly as much as $80 per dose, equivalent to about $1,000 today. Although rumors of his addiction circulated in Hollywood, they were quickly suppressed, with some alleging that the studio even supplied him with prohibited substance to keep him working. By the early 1920s, his addiction had severely impacted him. His wife, Dorothy, noticed significant changes in his personality and physical health, including weight loss and severe mood swings. At first, Wallace denied having a problem, but he eventually confessed to Dorothy, saying, "I thought I was big enough to fight my own battle and win. I thought I could come back alone, and you would never have to know." Despite his struggles, Wallace remained well-liked and skillful at concealing his addiction. At one point, a doctor was hired to stay with him for 2 weeks to monitor his condition. The doctor, while aware of Wallace's ongoing prohibited substance use, reported positively about him. Wallace's life spiraled into chaos, consumed by overwork, prohibited substance use, wild parties, numerous affairs, and an adopted daughter who was rumored to actually be his biological child from one of those affairs. The situation worsened when his prohibited substance dealers were arrested, and the press began exposing his substance abuse. His deteriorating health became increasingly obvious, but he continued working despite his condition. In October 1922, on the first day of filming Nobody's Money, Wallace collapsed on set. Assistant director Henry Hathaway described the incident. "He sort of fumbled about, bumped into a chair, and then just sat down on the floor and started to cry. They put him in a chair and he just keeled over. An ambulance was called and he was rushed to the hospital." Once celebrated as America's wholesome heartthrob, embodying the charm of a character straight out of The Great Gatsby, Wallace's public image crumbled when he was admitted to a sanatorium in late 1922 for prohibited substance withdrawal. Earlier that fall, Wallace and his wife Dorothy had left their children with her mother and retreated to the mountains to escape the temptations of prohibited substances and alcohol. There, Wallace focused on hiking and exercise, and over time, his cravings subsided. The couple returned home optimistic that he had conquered his addiction. However, within a week of their return, Wallace fell seriously ill. His condition continued to worsen over the following weeks, leading to his hospitalization and a diagnosis of influenza. On December 12, Wallace was admitted to Bangia Sanatorium in Hollywood for treatment of severe illness and nervous exhaustion. His condition remained critical. On December 16, Dorothy and her mother decided to share their story in an exclusive interview with the Los Angeles Times at their home. During the interview, Dorothy openly admitted Wallace always drank to some extent, referencing his alcohol use during Prohibition. She continued, About 2 years ago, he began using prohibited substances. At the time, he was very ill and had suffered a head injury. There was an overwhelming amount of work at his studio, and he felt he needed to keep up somehow. That's when he turned to prohibited substances, which ultimately led to his current illness. Dorothy's mother, Alice Davenport, an actress with over 100 film credits, supported Dorothy throughout her struggles. She took care of the children while Dorothy stayed with Wallace in the sanitarium. Reflecting on the chaotic environment, Alice said, "The house was not a home. It was more like a roadhouse. My son, in-laws' friends were constantly coming and going at all hours, and there was non-stop drinking. Many people showed up uninvited and stayed for hours. They wouldn't leave until all the liquor was gone. Some even stole entire quarts of whiskey, sneaking it out hidden under overcoats, capes, or in their pockets. Fans were shocked and wondered how they had been so misled." Reid's death had a profound impact on Hollywood, not just because it revealed the hidden lifestyle of the elite, but also because it highlighted the stark contrast between a star's public image and private struggles. While Wallace battled his addiction, Dorothy shared details of his experience with the New York Times. "He thought he was going to die the other night," she said. "He was so brave about it, poor boy. For 3 nights he believed he wouldn't survive. He isn't afraid of dying, but he wants so badly to live. For Billy, Betty, and me," referring to their son and adopted daughter. Dorothy recalled Wallace's moments of self-reflection. "How did I let myself get to this point? Why couldn't I have stopped earlier? I thought I was strong. I thought I knew myself so well. I just don't understand it." The Washington Post remarked, "His open smile and honest eyes seemed impossible to reconcile with the image of him as a slave to addiction." Dorothy later gave an update on his condition. "My husband is very, very sick. I don't know if he will fully recover, but he has broken the habit and won his fight. He fought this battle on his own, through sheer willpower and determination. I believe he will come back." Wallace Reid never recovered. His treatment consisted of a mix of unidentified pills and medications, combined with a strict diet. Rumors circulated that these pills were merely replacing one addiction with another. After 6 weeks with no signs of improvement, his wife, Dorothy, transferred him to a private sanitarium. There, his condition worsened, and he was confined to a padded room. At the time, addiction was often viewed as a moral failing rather than a medical condition. In the weeks leading up to his death, millions of fans were heartbroken and worried, but the fact that prohibited substances played a role in his decline made it scandalous to some. The rapid deterioration of Reid's health remains perplexing. While an overdose might seem like the obvious cause, he was actually battling multiple health issues, including kidney failure and respiratory problems, which may have been worsened by his treatment. One such treatment, the Crebo method, involved a dangerous mix of substances, including curare, a potent plant compound used as arrow poison in South America. Reid recklessly self-administered this treatment at home, which led to severe side effects such as nervous system damage, extreme exhaustion, and ultimately death. Through it all, Dorothy stayed by his side. After Wallace's death, Dorothy emerged as a pioneering figure in both female-led filmmaking and exploitation cinema, often crediting herself as Miss Wallace Reid in her projects. As Wallace's addiction became impossible to ignore, Dorothy spoke openly about his struggles with narcotics, framing the issue not with shame, but as a plea for understanding and compassion. However, her accounts of Wallace's experiences were inconsistent, at times appearing honest, and at other times seemingly in denial. This duality has made her a complex and occasionally controversial figure in film history. The cinema industry is plagued by an immoral element that threatens its integrity, as well as the morals and decency of our city and nation, declared the Methodist Preachers Association of Southern California in an open letter. Alternatively, it has been and continues to be unjustly maligned and slandered in unimaginable ways. The Reid scandal broke out during a time of intense fear over the prohibited substance menace, a topic Dorothy later addressed, or exploited, depending on interpretation, in the infamous 1923 film Human Wreckage, which became closely associated with Wallace Reid's legacy. A week later, Dorothy wrote a letter to the Times stating, "Through no fault of my own, and due to circumstances that are tragic enough, God knows, I have been placed in a position to take up the banner in the fight against prohibited substance addiction. This responsibility has been thrust upon me as Wallace's wife, and for his sake, as well as for the thousands of others suffering from this terrible disease, I cannot and will not abandon it." Dorothy Coe produced and starred in the film Human Wreckage, along with Thomas H. Ince. The movie, distributed by Film Booking Offices of America, premiered on June 17, 1923. Unfortunately, no copies of the film are known to exist today, making it another lost piece of cinema history. Dorothy, under the alias Miss Wallace Reid, toured the country to personally promote the film in one of the earliest examples of a roadshow engagement. In the story, Ethel McFarlane, played by Dorothy, brings a case to her attorney husband, Alan, portrayed by James Kirkwood Sr., involving a prohibited substance addict named Jimmy Brown. Meanwhile, Alan, overwhelmed by his work, is introduced to prohibited substances by a man at his social club. His addiction worsens, leaving him vulnerable to blackmail by prohibited substance dealers who push him to represent their associates in court. Jimmy, who has overcome his own addiction and now works as a taxi driver, comes to learn about Alan's plight. In a dramatic turn of events, Jimmy confronts the leader of the prohibited substance ring, who happens to be his passenger. In an act of self-sacrifice, Jimmy crashes his taxi into an oncoming train, killing them both and symbolizing his final stand against prohibited substance abuse. Following this, Alan recovers from his addiction and uses his position as a lawyer to fight back against the prohibited substance trade. The film concludes with a courtroom scene where Alan passionately advocates for stricter laws against narcotics. In the final moments, Dorothy breaks character and directly addresses the audience, urging them to join her in the fight against the devastating impact of prohibited substance addiction. Behind the scenes, Dorothy received covert support from Will Hays in her efforts to produce and star in Human Wreckage. Hays would later become infamous for imposing strict moral guidelines on American cinema with the introduction of the Hays Code in the 1930s. This period also marked the rise of the junkie stereotype in public consciousness. During the Great War, the warring nations temporarily set aside their conflicts to agree that various previously legal narcotics should be banned. These harsh new laws often had devastating effects on those already struggling with addiction. In the United States, this wave of anti-narcotic sentiment even extended to alcohol, ultimately leading to prohibition. For once, the wealthy were not exempt, as the enforcers of moral order sought to punish prohibited substance use among both the elite and the poor. Despite this, North American newspapers worked to generate sympathy for Reid, portraying him as a heroic figure, a generous soul fighting addiction and sacrificing his body in an effort to cleanse his spirit. The Washington Post described Reid's life as mirroring his screen persona, a story of triumph over hardship, though it ultimately cost him his life. Reid was just entering his 30s when his addiction spiraled out of control. Like a confident race car driver who mistakenly believes they're in complete control, Reid thought he could manage his addiction, but he ultimately lost control, leading to the destruction of his body. His decline was unavoidable, and on January 12, 1923, he passed away at the age of 31. The circumstances surrounding Reid's death were complicated, raising difficult questions about the origins of his addiction. Many argued that the movie studios were partly to blame, but this aspect was largely ignored. Instead, Hollywood crafted a narrative that aligned with its efforts to clean up its image after the scandals of the early 1920s. The focus shifted to Reid's personal struggles, with the media emphasizing that he had fallen into bad influences, aligning with public anxieties about Hollywood's indulgent and immoral lifestyle. This allowed the studios to deflect attention from their potential responsibility. as some speculated they fed Reid prohibited substance to keep him working. At the same time, this narrative helped the studios tighten control over independent filmmakers. The public was told a version of the story where Reid repented before his death and reconciled with his family and close friends. However, the truth was much harsher. He never left the sanatorium and battled his addiction relentlessly until his final moments. The circumstances surrounding his death and the debate about his true nature have influenced his image, a topic that fan magazines only address with caution. His passing shocked both the public and Hollywood, as he was the first major star to die from prohibited substance-related causes. In his honor, hundreds of floral arrangements were sent to the Reid family home, and studios closed on the day of his funeral so his many friends could attend. After Wallace's death, Dorothy faced significant emotional and financial difficulties. At the time of his death, Wallace was financially strained, largely due to his heavy spending on prohibited substance and alleged payments to blackmailers who had uncovered his moral indiscretions. Valentino's death was an unforgettable tragedy, but Reid was expected to live a peaceful life and grow old in his homeland. Had he lived, he would have been 75 years old on April 15, 1967, amidst a nation rife with conflict and anti-war protests. His family and friends sought to protect his reputation by emphasizing his family life and downplaying his battle with drugs to preserve his lovable image in the hearts of fans. Over the years, Hollywood fondly remembered Reid. He was often viewed as a victim of addiction rather than a moral failure. Reid was adored not only by women, though they loved him greatly, but also by men, boys, the elderly, and children. Fan magazines like Picture Play portrayed him as a spirited, fun-loving, and overly generous individual. These articles often highlighted his saintly domestic life through family portraits. Throughout the 1920s, Dorothy and his devoted fans worked tirelessly to keep his memory alive. They petitioned studios to re-release his surviving films, pointed to the overwhelming fan letters as proof of the public's enduring admiration for the clean, wholesome image Reid represented. As Valentino's legacy grew stronger, Reid gradually vanished from public memory. The Hays Code further diminished interest in the daring characters Reid portrayed, as audiences were already being saturated with tame, morally upright stories. Consequently, the appeal of Reid's nice guy persona waned. By the 1930s, Reid was rarely mentioned in publications like Movie Classic. However, Photoplay still featured him throughout the decade in its Screen Memories columns, where he was fondly remembered as a charming figure. Despite this, his films were not revived during that period and were left to decay, along with the industry's effort to erase the memory of Hollywood's scandalous, substance-fueled past. By the late 1930s, Valentino and Reid had left behind distinct legacies. Valentino was celebrated as the epitome of the Latin lover, his image firmly etched among Hollywood's legendary stars. In contrast, Reid was remembered as a symbol of Hollywood's journey toward moral reform, a tragic figure whose story spurred industry-wide changes. Following Wallace's passing, Dorothy and her children stayed in their Henda Park home for another 6 years. After moving out, Dorothy chose to lease the property. On February 1st, 1930, she acquired Casa de Contenta, a luxury apartment complex located at 1534 North Hayworth Avenue. The property featured several amenities, such as a lounge, tea garden, putting green, large swimming pool, gymnasium, and cafe. One of its prominent residents was Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, who was widely known for his involvement in major scandals. Dorothy lost Casa de Contenta because of a lawsuit related to The Red Kimono, a film she produced without obtaining the original story's rights. The property, now known as Hayworth Gardens, has been transformed into a condominium complex. In 1961, the former Reid home was torn down to build the Thunderbird Inn, the first motor hotel on the Strip, which later became the Standard Hotel. Dorothy Davenport, famously known as Miss Wallace Reid, died in 1977 at the age of 82. Wallace Reid is often remembered for his tragic death due to substance abuse, a scandal that marked the silent film era. His story seems to foreshadow the fates of two other famous actors who died years later near the Reids' former Henda Park home. In March 1982, John Belushi overdosed in a bungalow at the Chateau Marmont. On Halloween night in 1993, River Phoenix collapsed from an overdose outside the nearby Viper Room and was later pronounced dead at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Wallace made a brief appearance in Ken Russell's 1967 biopic Valentino, where he was portrayed as a silly, childlike figure riding a bicycle in an uncredited role. Although small, Wallace's life and that of his wife, Dorothy Davenport, inspired a key scene in both the 1937 and 1954 versions of A Star is Born. In these films, the character Norman Maine, a famous actor ruined by alcoholism, is married to rising star Vicki Lester. Overwhelmed by despair, Norman takes his own life. The movie's ending honors Dorothy's lifelong devotion to Wallace. In a poignant scene, Vicki introduces herself to a broadcast audience as Miss Norman Maine, reflecting how Dorothy identified herself as Miss Wallace Reid for 51 years, even after his death. Wallace is buried in the AA terrace of the Great Mausoleum at Forest Lawn Memorial Park Cemetery in Glendale, California. Thank you for joining us in uncovering the darker aspects of Wallace Reid's story. If you found this deep dive interesting, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more intriguing insights into Hollywood's mysterious history. Wishing you a great night. Hello everyone. Today we will explore the troubled life of YVONNE de Carlo. Before YVONNE de Carlo became famous as the iconic vampire Lily Munster in The Munsters, she was already one of Hollywood's most glamorous stars, known for her striking blue eyes and dark hair. While her looks captivated producers, their treatment of her behind the scenes was often unkind. Her personal life, however, was even more tumultuous and dramatic. For much of her life, YVONNE believed her father was a small-time criminal who disappeared shortly after she was born, but later, she uncovered a shocking truth. Born in September 1922 in Vancouver, Canada, YVONNE de Carlo's early years were like a Hollywood drama. Her mother, Marie, was a young woman who dreamed of having a daughter she could turn into a dancer. When giving birth to YVONNE, Marie reportedly screamed on the delivery table, "I want a girl. It must be a girl. I want a dancer." She got her wish, but not without heartbreak. When YVONNE was just 3 years old, her father, William, abandoned the family after getting involved in illicit dealings. Rumors swirled that he had died at sea while trying to avoid trouble, though the truth would come to light much later. This unstable start shaped YVONNE's childhood, and her mother's choices only added to the chaos. YVONNE's mother, Marie, always dreamed of seeing her daughter become a star, and she wasn't wrong. YVONNE had both beauty and star power. In 1940, as a teenager, she won second place in the Miss Venice Beauty Contest. Even more promising, a talent scout in the audience encouraged her to audition for a chorus line role at the Earl Carroll Theater. The opportunity seemed perfect, as the famous theater on Sunset Boulevard was exactly what YVONNE and her mother had been hoping for. However, the audition turned into a nightmare. The booking agent led YVONNE and her mother to the stage as promised, but YVONNE quickly realized that Carroll was only interested in evaluating her physical appearance inappropriately. Disgusted by the situation, YVONNE and her mother left immediately. Their next move was no less disheartening. Determined to prove herself and leave Carroll behind, YVONNE and her mother went to a rival nightclub, Florentine Gardens. This, however, brought its own humiliation. YVONNE performed a tap dance routine in front of a loud and rowdy audience. To make matters worse, the club owner decided to let the crowd determine her fate, asking, "Well, folks, is she in or out?" After receiving applause and whistles, YVONNE secured the role. But her challenges were far from over. More trouble lay ahead, and it would soon take a dangerous turn. After starting as a chorus girl, de Carlo worked her way up to becoming a featured dancer at the Florentine Gardens. However, there was a major problem. She was a Canadian citizen working in the US without a green card. Eventually, this caught up to her. After a few months on stage, immigration authorities detained and deported her. This was her first encounter with the law, but it led to an unexpected twist. Her manager at the Florentine Gardens, Niels Granlund, believed she had immense potential and was determined to bring her back. He appealed to the Canadian government, offering to sponsor her and provide steady employment. His efforts paid off, and De Carlo returned to Los Angeles, barely avoiding being sidelined for good. However, as her career gained momentum, she began attracting the wrong kind of attention. By the early 1940s, YVONNE de Carlo had climbed the ranks, landing several film roles and securing a contract with Paramount. In 1942, she was cast as a handmaiden to starlet Dorothy Lamour in the hit franchise film Road to Morocco. While this was a significant opportunity, it came with complications. People began to see De Carlo as a potential rival to Lamour, creating tension between the two. Meanwhile, De Carlo's personal life was also becoming more eventful during this period. Shortly after signing with Paramount, De Carlo met director Billy Wilder, who was preparing to create his masterpiece Double Indemnity. The young starlet and the seasoned director quickly began an affair, with De Carlo later describing Wilder as the first love of my life. However, she also admitted that he was the physical antithesis of my lifelong dream man. Unsurprisingly, their relationship was built on shaky ground. At the time of their fling, Wilder was still married, though separated from his wife. To keep their affair discreet, the pair stayed in a small rented hideaway. It was far from an ideal situation, and De Carlo was about to face heartbreak. Wilder, seemingly on the rebound from his failed marriage, was not ready for commitment, a reality the inexperienced De Carlo likely didn't anticipate. Their passionate relationship was short-lived, as Wilder eventually left her for another rising actress, Doris. YVONNE de Carlo sought revenge in the best way she knew, by achieving success, and she certainly did. While recovering from the heartbreak of a failed relationship, she landed the role of a lifetime. Producers were searching for an exotic-looking actress to play Salome in the film Salome, where she danced, and De Carlo beat out 20,000 other women for the part. However, there's a more intriguing twist to how she secured the role. According to legend, De Carlo landed it thanks to a campaign by Royal Canadian Air Force pilots, who had named her one of their favorite pin-up girls. The truth? De Carlo had two pilot friends and convinced them to rally their fellow servicemen for a little publicity push. Clever and resourceful, her plan worked. The role of Salome turned De Carlo into a glamorous star and an official pin-up sensation overnight. While the film wasn't a critical success, audiences flocked to see her captivating dance scenes. As one writer put it, she had all the looks one girl could ask for. More importantly, Salome earned her a new contract with Universal Studios, setting her career on an upward trajectory. But in De Carlo's life, every high seemed to be followed by a crash, and this time was no different. Shortly after Salome was released, De Carlo met the man who would change her life for the worse. At a release party for another film in her hometown of Vancouver, she encountered none other than Howard Hughes, a notorious Hollywood playboy, eccentric personality, and billionaire. Hughes, far from his usual Los Angeles haunts, had a rather unsettling reason for being there. Known for pursuing beautiful actresses with unconventional methods, Hughes approached De Carlo in his typically peculiar style. He openly declared his intention to win her over and confessed that he had watched Salome, where she danced 5 times. He even admitted to flying all the way from Los Angeles to Vancouver just to meet her privately. Despite this unnerving behavior, De Carlo's reaction was unexpected. Like her earlier encounter with Billy Wilder, De Carlo didn't feel an instant attraction to Hughes. In fact, she described him as lanky, undernourished, and deeply sad, which made her feel sorry for him. Yet, against all logic and past experiences, she made a surprising choice. She decided to start a relationship with Hughes anyway. ignoring the lessons she might have learned from her previous mistakes with Wilder. As anyone could have predicted, this decision eventually backfired. Within a day of meeting, De Carlo and Hughes began a passionate romance. While De Carlo quickly moved past her initial pity for Hughes and fell deeply in love with him, he did not feel the same way. Hughes was distant and unresponsive, doing things like taking her up in one of his planes to teach her how to take off and land, but never how to actually fly. Despite the warning signs, dating Howard Hughes could make a girl overlook certain red flags. However, the next issues were impossible to ignore. As De Carlo fell more in love, she experienced yet another betrayal. Hughes consistently ignored her attempts to get him to propose and refused to make their relationship public. Unsurprisingly, the couple broke up shortly after their romance began. Around this time, De Carlo's life took a dramatic turn. Her romantic escapades with Billy Wilder and Howard Hughes marked her first plunge into the whirlwind love life of a famous movie star. After breaking up with Hughes, she fully embraced the Hollywood dating scene, becoming involved with stars like Robert Stack and Burt Lancaster. Her highly publicized romances earned her the less than flattering nickname Hollywood's #1 bachelor girl. When she tried to settle down again, it ended in disaster. In 1947, YVONNE de Carlo landed a significant role in the film noir Brute Force, which starred her then-lover Burt Lancaster. However, during filming, De Carlo developed a strong attraction to another actor under contract, Howard Duff. Despite her recent wild streak, neither De Carlo nor Duff seemed to care, and they quickly became engaged. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a terrible decision. Initially, everything seemed perfect. Even the notoriously controlling studio executives approved of their relationship. But one major issue would soon unravel everything. De Carlo admitted that she and Duff had almost nothing in common. In fact, Duff's main appeal was simply that he wanted to marry her, something Hughes had never offered. By April 1947, De Carlo and Duff were as official as a couple could be, having announced their engagement while Hollywood gossip columns eagerly anticipated their wedding. However, De Carlo soon noticed a troubling issue with her fiancé. He was a heavy and unhealthy drinker. This forced her to make a difficult and painful decision. Ending an engagement is never easy, but breaking off a high-profile Hollywood engagement was especially challenging. Despite this, De Carlo chose to end things with Duff when she fully understood the extent of his addiction. Meanwhile, De Carlo's career was also at a crossroads. Those cheerful Technicolor films no longer fulfilled her. She wanted more from her career and began pursuing roles in black and white films. So when she landed a significant role in the noir film Criss Cross opposite Burt Lancaster once again, it felt like a dream come true. Unfortunately, it quickly turned into a nightmare. Although securing the role in Criss Cross was a big achievement, De Carlo's excitement was short-lived when critics described her performance as a femme fatale, as inconsistent. Things only went downhill from there. The following year, the director of Buccaneers Girl casually remarked that De Carlo was not a first-class star, but came in on schedule. In other words, he considered her merely adequate, not exactly a compliment for someone striving to be recognized as an artist. To make matters worse, despite all her efforts, De Carlo never succeeded in becoming one of the iconic femme fatale actresses of her era. Disheartened, she returned to the types of films she no longer enjoyed but relied on for her livelihood. Adding to her struggles, while playing Jane in Calamity Jane and Sam Bass, she had to face the awkwardness of being reunited with her ex-fiancé, Howard Duff. But soon, another unexpected twist came her way. The late 1940s were a chaotic time for De Carlo, and things only grew more complicated. During the filming of the western The Gal Who Took the West, De Carlo fell for one of her crewmates, a rugged stuntman named Jock Mahoney. Hoping once again to find stability, she accepted Mahoney's marriage proposal. Unfortunately, this relationship too ended in heartbreak. During their engagement, De Carlo became pregnant and dreamed of finally settling down and starting a family. However, her happiness was short-lived. During a routine checkup, doctors discovered an ovarian cyst, that required surgery. Tragically, the operation led to the loss of her baby. After this devastating experience, Mahoney could have supported her through the pain, but instead, he caused her even more heartache. Whether due to grief over the lost child or a lack of commitment, Mahoney drifted away. To make matters worse, DeCarlo discovered that Mahoney was having an affair with actress Margaret Field, echoing the betrayal she had experienced during her earlier relationship with Billy Wilder. Their engagement ultimately fell apart. After starting over from scratch, the 1950s proved to be an especially bleak period in DeCarlo's life. Previously known for her carefree approach to dating, she now seemed to cling desperately to any marriage proposal that came her way. By the mid-1950s, she had already been engaged twice more, first to English photographer Cornell Lucas, and later to actor Robert Urquhart, another co-star turned ex. While DeCarlo insisted she was simply waiting for the right man, when he finally appeared, it happened in the most unexpected way. In 1955, during the filming of Shotgun, DeCarlo met stuntman Bob Morgan. However, their budding romance faced a significant obstacle. Morgan was married and had a daughter. Despite their mutual attraction, DeCarlo claimed she didn't want to disrupt his family. Yet within a few months, two extraordinary events would bring them together. Shortly after DeCarlo finished her film, she received the opportunity of a lifetime. Renowned director Cecil B. DeMille offered her the role of Sephora, Moses' wife, in the epic The Ten Commandments. It was a monumental offer, and DeCarlo accepted immediately. When she arrived on set, she encountered a familiar face, Bob Morgan. In the short time since their brief flirtation on the set of Shotgun, Morgan's wife had sadly passed away. Now free to pursue a relationship, DeCarlo and Morgan quickly reconnected, and their attraction blossomed. They married on November 21, 1955, during the filming of the movie. The former bachelorette, YVONNE de Carlo, was now officially off the market. However, this marked the beginning of new challenges in her life. Throughout her career, DeCarlo was known as a reliable actress, though not necessarily a standout on screen. However, The Ten Commandments was a demanding project that required a great deal from its actors. Feeling insecure about her ability to meet the film's high expectations, DeCarlo took immediate action. She enrolled in lessons on basket weaving and shepherding to add authenticity to her performance, and hired a drama coach to refine her acting skills. Despite all her preparation, there was one thing director Cecil B. DeMille insisted on that no training could change: her eye color. Famous for her striking blue eyes, DeCarlo was a Technicolor icon, but DeMille felt brown eyes would better suit the film's aesthetic. Although she objected, DeMille ultimately allowed her to keep her natural eye color, making an exception for her. In the end, his decision turned out to be the right one. When the highly successful film was released, there was widespread speculation that YVONNE de Carlo might receive a Best Supporting Actress nomination at the Oscars. However, this is where DeCarlo made a costly mistake. Riding high on the success of The Ten Commandments and her newfound status as a joyful newlywed, she insisted on being considered for the Best Actress category instead of Best Supporting Actress. Her overconfidence backfired, and she ended up with no nominations at all. Unfortunately, worse events were on the horizon. DeCarlo's stuntman husband worked in a highly dangerous profession, and in 1963, tragedy struck. While filming a train robbery scene for How the West Was Won, Morgan was performing as the movie's marshal. The scene required him to hold on to a log positioned between two train cars, one of which was loaded with heavy timber. Suddenly, disaster struck. The chain holding the log snapped, and several tons of timber fell onto Morgan. When the dust settled, DeCarlo was devastated. Although Morgan survived the accident against all odds, he was severely injured. It took him 5 long years to walk properly again without assistance. Saddled with overwhelming medical bills and the responsibility of raising 2 children, DeCarlo and Morgan decided to sue the studio for unsafe working conditions. MGM denied any responsibility for the accident, and by the mid-1960s, the couple was struggling financially and constantly arguing. Desperate for help, De Carlo turned to her friend John Wayne, who offered her a small role in his Western comedy McClintock. Though the part was minor, it provided some financial relief. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. Still in dire need of money, De Carlo took on a role that would go on to redefine her career, for better or worse. In just a few years, YVONNE De Carlo went from refusing supporting actress roles to desperately accepting whatever parts she could get. When the role of Lily Munster in the TV sitcom The Munsters was offered to her, she hesitated. However, financial struggles left her with no choice. De Carlo needed the money, and working on an American TV show promised a substantial paycheck. Reluctantly, she accepted the role, worried about how her more serious co-stars might judge her decision. But fate had a surprise in store. Everything that could have gone wrong with the Munsters turned out right. The cast quickly recognized De Carlo's incredible comedic timing, and contrary to expectations, she displayed none of the diva-like attitude often associated with Hollywood starlets. To her surprise, De Carlo found herself enjoying the experience. She loved her castmates, the scripts, and the light-hearted atmosphere on set. She even found creative inspiration in unexpected ways. Known for her deep commitment to her roles, De Carlo impressed many with her pitch-perfect portrayal of the campy yet lovable Lily Munster. When asked how she mastered the character, De Carlo gave a memorable response. The show's creators had suggested she play Lily as though she were Donna Reed, the epitome of America's wholesome sweetheart from classic family television. Before long, De Carlo's role as Lily Munster began influencing her personal life as well. While filming The Munsters, YVONNE De Carlo drove a Jaguar sedan. Embracing the spooky theme of the show, she decorated her car with eerie ornaments as a tribute to her work. However, there was a problem. Fans kept stealing the ornaments as souvenirs. De Carlo's story didn't end there. Stephen Sondheim, while working on his musical follies about aging, washed-up stars, immediately thought of De Carlo for a role. Although it might have seemed like an unflattering connection, it was actually a compliment. De Carlo became the inspiration for one of Sondheim's hit songs. She performed on Broadway, singing the iconic "I'm Still Here," and the show turned out to be a major success. Unfortunately, her personal life was unraveling during this period. In a 1975 interview, De Carlo made a shocking revelation. She had always claimed her father was William Middleton, a petty criminal from New Zealand. However, she admitted this wasn't true. Middleton wasn't her father. Without revealing much detail, she disclosed that her biological father was actually Polynesian. After years of financial conflict and an inability to move past the trauma of the MGM incident, YVONNE De Carlo and her husband Bob Morgan divorced in 1973. Citing irreconcilable differences. With her marriage behind her, De Carlo became increasingly open about her past. In 1987, De Carlo published her autobiography, where she shared many personal details. She revealed that she had 22 lovers, including several well-known A-list stars. However, she also expressed her disdain for the typical Hollywood archetype, calling them shallow. Over time, she realized she valued personality over appearance, even stating that someone like scientist Albert Einstein would have been her ideal match. Tragically, the final years of De Carlo's life were marked by hardship. In 1997, her son passed away unexpectedly, leaving her heartbroken. Shortly after, she suffered a minor stroke and was hospitalized. She spent the last 9 years of her life in care, passing away from heart failure in 2007 at the age of 84. From television to film and even Broadway, YVONNE De Carlo is remembered for her breathtaking beauty and unforgettable performances.